Hi, hello. This is our 12th Dialogic Pedagogy podcast. And yeah, we have posted last week again our topics for choices. It seems that the topic of the similarities and differences between drama and education and the dialogic pedagogy came as the highest demanded topic. So here are we, Eugene Matusov and Anna Marjanovic-Shane. So it's interesting that this topic would come up because I actually wrote a paper on this topic, which is called Spoil Sport, the differences between drama and education and dialogic pedagogy. And there are a lot of similarities.
So why don't you say what is drama education is?
Okay, so drama in education is really a very wide term for me because there are different approaches to drama in education, but basically it involves some kind of creating improvisations or more or less directed imaginary worlds in which the students are involved in constructing this imaginary world in different ways that probably are not important for our discussion here. But what's important is that imaginary world of a drama in education, like in a play, like playing children or like plays in theater, is creating some new world in which certain characters have life, certain events happen, and it's like artistic way of doing, creative, very creative way of doing.
Not clear. Can you give an example?
Okay, so one of the pioneers maybe of drama in education in the 60s was Dorothy Hathcote, a British educationalist, and she would involve children in, usually it was children or teenagers, in creating and living in a world like, for instance, in one of these instances, she came to a school and asked the children what would they like to play about, and one of the issues that came up is prisoners of war.
How old were the kids?
They were 12, 13 years old, and this is 60s. So a lot of war movies from the Second World War were around. The whole issue of good and bad between the Nazis and the British were very alive. And so she said, okay, let's play Prisoners of War. She, however, created a very quick framework. The framework was such that the children should be playing soldiers, and she was first their commander, and in that she was training them how to use like in any kind of military camp, how to use their weapons, how to organize themselves into small groups to do something, some kind of issues or something like that. What was very important for her is to immediately create a situation in which the children would be thrown in with a very clear but yet very wide outline of what's going on, in which the children could improvise a lot of things themselves. Nevertheless, she kept both the role of herself as a teacher, and she played various roles of leading people in that camp. So like she was either commander of this small group of British soldiers, or in some other acts she was the Nazi who captured, who was the commander of the camp in which these soldiers were then became prisoners. They were battle scenes, scenes where children are trying to, or soldiers, children and soldiers are trying to create a conspiracy against the camp and to try to break out. And she was always very, very important for her was that she leads them, and that any kind of disagreement between.
Okay, Anna, can I stop because you start criticizing her? I
Okay.
hear that. And let me ask you, I still couldn't visualize what drama in education is. Because I can imagine an imaginary play in which teaching involved, they probably organize children. I can see that. Where is education there? What does that need to do with education? Why it cannot be part of the just play or theater or something else? Where is education there?
Okay. Well, this whole approach is very heavily based on theories in which play and imaginary situations that play create is assumed to be the leading part of development. Or as Vygotsky called it, zone of proximal development. That only in the imaginary as if situations that children or adults create, we can move ahead of what we are today. So that children first develop in play, and then the reality develops, social, cultural, intellectual development somehow happens from that imaginary social.
I still understand, I understand psychology, but where is education? Because even Vygotsky would say that development and education is two different things. So where is education there? And give me, like, as educator, I cannot recognize education so far.
Okay.
Unless you guide me. I can understand education of, let's say, in play or something theater, but I don't see education in broader sense. Like, for example, is it something about, she's doing that in order the kids learn about World War II or history or what? What exactly?
Okay.
Where is education there?
Okay, she developed this approach.
And I don't need necessarily to hear about her. I want to
Right.
know drama and education. So maybe the example may be not good or something. Shifted, show where is the education there?
The education is.
And how it's understood, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
How it's understood education there and where is education?
Okay. What is understood as education is, I think, and now I may be wrong, but two things. One, that children would be immersed in situations that are taken from the real life. Let's say, for instance, in some more recent approaches in Holland, they create an imaginary shop in which children can buy and sell various items, and there are all kinds of things going on like in a shop. And so they think that in this kind of a situation, when they pretend to be actually selling, buying, getting merchandise, the children will learn very complex things that are connected and necessary for such a
okay, so the kids, can I just summarize? So and check whether or not you agree with me or not. So the kids will learn economic exchanges.
Yes, they could learn.
Okay.
Or they would learn something about history, maybe of Second World War. In some other situations, they will, let's say, monks in a medieval castle, and about the life of, and not only
A life of, finish that.
Yeah.
Life of what?
a life of monks in the castle, life in the
Like a feudal society.
in
how
feudal
society
society, and the life, social, political, economical, what kind of science they had, what they thought about the world, all kinds of that.
Okay, let me ask you another example, and whether or not you would consider that it's a drama in education. You know, there was for 90s and 90s especially, there was a very popular software in the United States and maybe even elsewhere that's called Oregon Trail. When it's a software, it's a computer game in which kids involved in historical kind of historical imaginary play in moving in St. Louis to Oregon, like American pioneers did, meeting some dangerous situations, planning, and so on and so forth. Would you consider that a computer game is drama in education?
Yes, in a way I would. Also, it was awarded as the best educational play, and the purpose.
Not play, game.
The purpose was, and explained that the children would learn about the settlers, about the lives of the people in the settling camps, about their conflicts with the Native American Indians, about all kinds of issues in their lives, the hunting or diseases that they would have, problems that they would solve, that they are immersed in that game to...
You said in a way, what hesitates you?
To me, the hesitation is twofold. Let me tell you in an example that I have from my childhood. In my childhood in Yugoslavia, we had a lot of American cartoons. So that's why I'm comparing Oregon Trail as kind of a very sketchy environment, which is not full of life, and it's constructed based on somebody's idea of what historically this whole Oregon Trail is. So historically speaking, there is only one point of view in the game represented, but the game, the point of view of makers of the game, which is one historical explanation of what there is. History, of course, we know is very contested field.
But okay, this is what I don't understand. Sorry to interrupt you. Are you criticizing that particular drama in education, or you criticizing the way how it's done, or you criticizing Oregon Trail because it's not fully drama in education? That's what I don't understand, what you're trying to do.
Okay, I'm criticizing drama in education.
Okay, in this case, let's not, because this, I'm trying to still understand what drama in education is, before critique, before it's critiquing. So it's kind of, there is kind of curriculum there. It could be historical, economic, whatever, planning, social, and so on and so forth. And it's just done through the play. Okay, so what's the role of the teacher? Like, so far when you told me about Dorothy, what's her last name?
Heathcote.
Heathcote, yes, Heathcote, sorry. I still couldn't like imagine what's her role in that play, because like from you, what you told me, I don't see necessity for even teacher to be involved. Kids 12, 13 years old could play about war, especially the watched a lot about movies about the war, without the teacher. So what's the teacher, what she brought to the game? And specifically, not organizational, I don't care about the organizational part, I more care about education. Where is she bringing that curriculum? And if it's difficult for you, you can switch to talk about economic exchange, like playing in the store. Where is role of the teacher as kind of providing guidance? Can you?
The role of the teacher is as the author of the whole play, and specifically of the whole setting. In this war, Prisoners of War, she was more improvisational because she didn't pre-plan. But usually Dorothy Heathcote and most of the drama and educators pre-plan very carefully what kind of world that imaginary world should be, and what are the possibilities, what it affords for children to do, so that they feel that the children would learn through socialization and through living and experiencing. One very big word coming also from Russia is переживание, just being immersed in a certain kind of world that creates certain kind of affordances. That is not
again, I would like specific.
Okay, specifically, Dorothy Heathcote, let's say that medieval castle, planned for days everything, all kinds of activities that she would offer.
Like for example,
how would the monks write a letter to the emperor? What kind of ink they should use, for instance? How to mix that ink, the recipes for that ink. She actually had developed a whole list of books that the children will have resources to find there. And so...
Thank you. No, that's now I can see.
So it's the environment that affords certain things in many ways. Oregon Trail also is an environment, very planned environment, what's possible and what's not possible in that in Oregon Trail. For instance, you can have interchanges with or talks with some other characters that you are encountering, but not with some other, or in very limited ways. Like women and the people of color and Native American Indians are more like a stage there that you encounter them as a main player, but they don't much. They just limit you or not limit you, move the character around as if they are just some props there.
Okay, so the bottom line, return back to Oregon Trail. So you will consider that without any reservation that it's drama and education. You might not like drama education, but that's another story.
Okay, I would consider it a specific kind of drama in education in which children are not engaged. Well, I can say yes. There is improvisation. There is collaboration between children. There are various principles in drama in education that are very important. One is that people suspend belief. And that's the main, that's like a guiding principle. What does it mean? Like in theater, you come into the theater and you're watching people doing something, or in the movies, and you just, in order to enjoy that, you have to suspend the belief that it's phony, that it's not really true.
Okay, so this is one principle. What other principle? And I specifically want to hear educational ones.
Yeah.
Besides maybe drama, but I would like to hear drama as well.
Educational principles are collaboration and agreement. Very important.
What is anything to do? Why is it education? It can be outside of education. So why is it? I want the specific educational principles.
Well, educational principles are very important. Agreement is a very important part for education in drama. And education is because it goes together with suspension of belief. This is now the world that we are exploring. It's given like that, and there is not.
Why is it educational? I still don't understand. You constantly start shifting to the drama, and for drama, I can see why agreement can be very important, because we're playing some play and so on and so forth, and it can be part of the improvisation as well. But I don't understand education. Focus on education. Please.
Yeah, I think that it's important in education because it's education which is heavily based on socialization of children and into existing cultural valuable practices, norms, beliefs, values, science as it is known, which is not questionable for the educator themselves. This is what it was, Oregon Trail, or this is how the monks used to make ink. That's it. It becomes both the food for their improvisation and also the end product of what children learn. We know now history about Oregon Trail. What happened? Who went where? What were the territories? There is a lot of historical facts that are built in there that are non-contestable, and also they are learned in a very interesting, functional way, functional for the game itself. So there is no much exploration in the sense of finding out beyond the game, what does it really mean? Was it really so historically, or is it possible in some other way? Let's say if the children would start doing something else in the minds.
Okay. Again, you're moving to critique, and I want first to understand that before you shifting to critique. One more question before we're moving to your territory, which is you won't criticize that, and I can hear that, and I try to hold you on that. Okay, before starting that, please, one more thing. Is it that socialization, and we talk about in one of our articles about open socialization and closed socialization. And open socialization is, or let me start with the closed. Closed, it's when practice in which people socialize is well defined, or at least well defined for them. So their transformation of that practice is considered to be illegitimate. They should really follow exactly canon of the practice. Again, maybe somebody else allows to transform the practice, but these people are not. Like, for example, when children study spelling conventional spelling. They are not allowed to improvise or deviate from the canon. In some pedagogy, in some other, they're invited to do innovative spelling, for example. But even that will be at some point. It's only pedagogical tool. At some point, they will be not allowed to create new spellings, right? But in another socialization, people are allowed to improvise and become kind of a part of the creative force in a way in socialization. Okay? Like probably my favorite example, although it might distract us, it's The Wave, in the movie The Wave. In a real case, the students who were socialized in being neo-Nazi, their creativity in general was supported. It was constrained, not any creativity was supported on that, but nevertheless, a lot of their innovations were very much supported by the teacher. In this case, it was one we called open socialization, maybe limited open, but still open socialization. So in drama education, that socialization is, you really need to fit to existing things like Oregon Trail or World War II or whatever, or it will be allowed to fantasize and get moved beyond of that, and to kind of, like, for example, creating ink. Maybe some students in the role of the monks create a new type of ink, or create a new type of communication or something.
Right.
So how it was?
I think that because I define drama in education very widely to include both Dorothy Hadcott's approach, and then there is another approach called play worlds that's more contemporary now, with very little children, and improvisation, or improv as they call it in education. I think that it ranges between closed and open socialization. It may be sometimes more closed, like in the Prisoners of War, where Dorothy Hadcott didn't allow children to have certain type of guns, only what she envisioned as, or it was really there. So they could not completely, or Oregon Trail is very rigid, really, in the way what's possible or not. Especially its first edition.
It's not what's possible or not. That's different issue. Whether or not, again, it's you need to then socialize in some kind of well-defined existing things, in which creativity is not allowed. Versus you allow, or creativity will be only bounded within predefined legitimate boundaries, or it's the creativity and transformation of the practice itself is allowed through the socialization.
I think always there is a limitation in drama in education, even when it's most open. For instance, I think the most open socialization is in improv, where really only just sketchy things are given in advance, and also usually chosen by children or by audience in different ways, and then anything can happen, except for one thing. There are some rules that are like non-negotiable. One rule is yes and in improvisation. So it means that everybody who plays, in order to play, cannot say no. For anything that somebody suggested, you have to say yes and build on that. And so that, let's say, like it creates a core possibility to build this new world. At the same time, this allows transformation of improvisation into something else.
But wouldn't it be fair to say that everything has constraints? You cannot.
Yeah, it would be definitive. Yes. Fair to say that. But the constraint here is very important constraint. It's a constraint on disagreement in all of them.
Okay, well, I think, I don't know how our listeners or viewers, but at least I have an idea what you mean by drama in education. So I think I'm ready to move to the critical part, or comparing with dialogic pedagogy as well. Okay, let's jump to that now.
To the dialogic pedagogy. Okay. So let's say that just summarize this, what we had, in order to then move to the other. First, there is this suspension of belief. In order to build a world, imaginary world, all the players need to together agree that they will be building that world. they may have negotiations about what more or less this world is going to be, but they are working for building the world together. So anybody who is not together, like in that way, no matter.
What do you mean by that way?
You said wave, like in the.
No, I just want to explain it because I'm not. I can recognize that, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so a little bit digression.
This is a German movie, The Wave.
The Wave.
About experiment, pedagogical experiment that made in Palo Alto by one of the social Ron John, yes, a teacher, American teacher, who was teaching about authoritarian and totalitarian regimes in the high school in Palo Alto.
Yes, and in that example, he immersed his middle school, almost seniors, juniors and seniors in exploring.
Okay, let's not deviate.
Right, just very quickly, Nazi society. This became their. This movement became their greeting, like in the Nazi society, the greeting. So that for us now becomes kind of quickly like in that. They very quickly created. So suspension of disbelief means we all have to believe that this world exists. Anybody who exists in imaginary way, or we are building it, it becomes a place where we live. The characters, the people start living in that world. You come as you and live in that world.
But is it a principle of any play?
Let's table that.
Okay. We follow you. Okay.
It's play is more complicated because education uses play in a more systematic way than play in itself is.
Okay. Let's go.
So since that it is, imagine if somebody says, "Oh, no, I'm not playing at all," or let's make this a caricature, or this is really about like shooting balloons in the stratosphere or something else. And we know from play that children who don't want to play as other children play are called spoil sport. They spoil everything. It's not just they don't want to play, but this imaginary world, since it has to be withheld within the imagination of everybody together, cannot live if somebody starts to pierce that. For everybody, it's spoiling for everybody. It just cannot go because it's constantly reminding people that this is not real, and it cannot proceed. That's one of the reasons why improvisation has to have that yes and, so that everybody would kind of be in there. This is, I wanted to summarize to that because I think critical dialogue is opposite in that sense. It's a suspension not of disbelief, but a suspension of belief. Because here we suspend disbelief in theater so that we would believe in this imaginary world and experience things through there. In critical, especially critical ontological dialogue, we said, wait a minute, you think like that, but hold, don't believe in what you think. Let me tell you another alternative way to think, or there's somebody
not clear. Can you elaborate? This is very interesting, but not clear.
Okay. So suspension,
especially with example, please.
Yes. Suspension. I'll give you example right away. Suspension of belief means that you can temporarily or forever, depending on, start to test your ideas and say maybe this could be explained this way or that way. You're constantly shifting points of view and beliefs. Actually, it's all critical dialogue is based not on belief but on suspicion. While drama in education has to be based on belief, like we believe that, and that's why we suspend disbelief.
But it can
here an example.
Okay.
Okay. So, in my article, I used an example of a class that I had with my students who are, at that time, they were preschool, early childhood education and preschool teachers. That's a master's class for them. And most of them work with children who are between like 4 and 10 years old. There were two students who were working in elementary school and others were working with very small children. And one of my students worked with the children with autism. And in her work, she used heavily developed the approach to autism that was heavily developed on behaviorism, on the conditioning in the way how behaviorism was developed. the main principle is that if there is a certain behavior and you reward it, that behavior will be strengthened and become kind of behavior, and if you punish behavior, it will be extinguished and not. So it's a principle.
So you should reward desired behavior,
yes,
and punish undesired behavior.
or ignore.
Or ignore just
undesired. So that behavior will be
that kind of
for
thing.
instance, let's say a child is having a tantrum. You can punish them many times until they don't have tantrum, or just ignore the tantrum. So with a tantrum, they can't get anything. They kind of learn that tantrum is not the way how to that will achieve anything. And if they behave nicely, or not only autistic but anybody, like say please, whatever, you reward that, and so they learn how to do it. This behaviorist approach is, for many different reasons, not appealing to me, and I don't want to go into
no, please don't. Okay.
into that why. And so I was looking to provoke in one of the classes a discussion about why behaviorism is good or bad, or in my view at that time, why is it bad? So that I would create a suspicion in this student and other students who also in some other ways were using behaviorism, like token system in schools, like reward good spelling or good behavior and punish bad spelling and bad behavior with various stickers or whatever rewards. Also sometimes used. I wanted to create a discussion about why is that bad. And so my idea in critical dialogue was not to create an imaginary world in which we will experience how behaviorism is bad, but that we have a critical discussion. Some people think it's good, some it's bad. So, in what way? This is an example when my provocation to them was an ethical provocation. What does it mean that you will reward somebody, and what's the reward, the nature of the reward? Because in the original video that we watched by Skinner, the pigeons who were being trained like that were always held half hungry so that the food could be rewarded. And based on that, I asked my students, so what is the reward for children? And my student who was talking about, who worked with the autistic children, she said attention. They want attention, and so if you don't pay attention to them, it will be no reward or punishment, and that's how you would be able to train them, with a lot of attention to reward and less. And I put that on a ethical test. There were other students in my class who also were very much appalled with that kind of.
So I still couldn't see where is suspense of belief here.
Okay. So for my students, all of them.
And for you, by the way.
Right. Okay. This first.
And I don't, I know that story, unfortunately, and it's a long story. I want shorter version of that, and with focus not what happened, but where is suspension of belief?
The suspension of belief is when we can start to test the idea. Is it?
No, in this case, I want a specific example of that, because I still couldn't sense where is suspensions of belief in dialogic pedagogy.
Okay, so in this particular example, imagining that behaviorism, for 3 or 4 of my students in that class, behaviorism was the accepted and good, the right way how to approach children's education. In elementary school with various tokens, managing their class behavior.
No, it's clear. Okay, and where is suspension?
The suspension is that suddenly I approached them with a provocative alternative.
And they resisted to that. So there is no suspension of their belief.
They resist.
And plus, you basically what's happened, you have your belief which is opposite to theirs.
Correct.
Then they have their belief. So you push with your belief on their belief, they push it back.
Right.
I don't see any suspension of anybody's beliefs, neither yours nor theirs.
Right. And so I was stuck at that particular moment. until yeah, I consulted with you and you gave me a magic tool, which you called magic wand. And so the magic wand imaginary tool. So we're creating again an imaginary situation. It would be a situation in which, if you had a magic wand and you just waved it over people, they could immediately either know what you want them to know or do what you want them to do, including yourself. And so instead of calling it behaviorism.
So, okay, so there will be no tantrum. Your child start tantrum, you
Yes.
and there is no child tantrum,
Right.
autistic kid.
Yes.
Or autistic kid will be, if autistic kid is aggressive, you pum, and will be
Right.
not aggressive
No
but very
aggression
peaceful.
yes.
Okay.
Or
After that, and not only after that, but forever after that.
Right.
Okay.
Or child doesn't know how to spell.
Okay, no, this is, we're still focusing on behaviorism. That's nothing to do with behaviorism, but please not switch to the other topic.
Okay, so I asked in the next class the students who were falling apart in the first class because of this direct confrontation. With the magic wand, we now have an imaginary scenario as an alternative possibility, which takes us out from this direct confrontation.
Tell us what's happened, because you're still conceptualizing what's happened, but we don't know what's happened.
That was an incredibly successful provocation for all of us, including me, to start thinking, what kind of behaviors do we want the question was, when would you use the magic wand, and when you wouldn't, and why you wouldn't.
And why you would.
And why you would. So the question becomes then about, if behaviorism is magic wand, when is it good and when is it bad? So there is no it's always good or it's always
okay.
bad.
Give examples for, again, students and you, when there was kind of transcendence of their beliefs, or there's kind of something problematic situation. Both them who believers in behaviors, please table others, and you who believe anti-behaviorist, when behaviorism will be maybe okay. Okay,
right.
Tell us.
So for my students, it was the first revelation before transcendence, is that there are some things that they would use the magic wand for, and some things that they wouldn't.
Let's focus when they wouldn't, because when they would, it's not interesting, since the behaviorist, it's understandable that they would.
Right.
But more interesting when they wouldn't.
They would not use, specifically two students, they would not use magic wands to change somebody's belief without their knowledge.
And you're talking about behaviorist students.
Behaviorist students.
So
this student who worked with the autistic children, she would not change their behavior when it's, well, those are 4-year-old children, in terms of their developing, this time not that, but developing attitudes toward their family. Like looking somebody in the eyes. She would not make them all the time look somebody in the eyes. She would support that in different ways with safe situations, but she would let them develop that personal connection to somebody else. She specifically talked about children being able to sit, those little children with autism have very big problems in communicating with their parents or teachers or other children.
Again, examples. Can you give specific examples?
That's exactly what she said. That she noticed that this one girl that was one day sitting in her lap on her own, then when her parents came, first time looked them in the eyes and smiled at them. And she treasures those kinds of moments that are spontaneous.
But they're not problematic. She would not use behavior because it's not needed.
No, this is how she conceptualized. She could wave a magic wand and she would on the girl, and she would always be communicating very nicely with other people.
Okay, yeah.
But she said she wouldn't.
Why not?
Because it's so important for the girl to do that job on her own.
Interesting. Okay, what about you?
For me, I was reminded about many situations in which it's very useful to wave a magic wand for me. And I always said I wouldn't do anything like that, because inappropriate, unethical. But then I stopped smoking exactly on that principle of rewarding myself for good behavior and punishing myself with bad behavior, and some uses of patches that were physically getting the addiction out of me. And so I realized that many in many situations I wish let's say I would really use magic on my memory. My memory is kind of sometimes very spotty and patchy, and I don't know if I can retrain myself to have full memory. I would use a magic to remember certain people.
In dialogic pedagogy, suspending belief, it's in order to find its boundary of that belief.
Yes.
Or sometimes even maybe prove that it may be not good belief entirely. Yeah. Okay, now I see that. Thank you. That was helpful. Okay. And okay. So this is. But you mentioned very interesting. Very briefly, you mentioned that there is imagination in dialogic pedagogy. So
it's very important.
Yes, and where is the role of imagination in drama in education versus imagination in dialogic?
Okay, education. So in drama in education, the imagination is used to create the worlds in which the characters or people who enter can live. As if, now we are living as if we are the monks in the some castle. And in that as if world, we are discovering more and more things about that world that could be done, what happened, what kind of clothes, or whatever that is. So imagination there is important to create this illusion, or actually Huizinga, from whom I took this idea. Huizinga?
Is it
who is a Dutch philosopher of play. He wrote a book, The Homo Ludens, and in which he has this sentence about spoiled sport who is treated by the society worse than a cheat. That intrigued me, and then I started thinking, like, why spoiled sport is such destructive for the society, and cheat is not. And spoiled sport destroys...
okay, we again...
Yeah, okay, yeah, all right. So let me get back to that. Imagination in the drama in education or in play, imagination is used to create the world. In critical dialogue, imagination is absolutely necessary in order to be able to create the boundaries with what you think is real. So magic wand is an imaginary world which is metaphorically representing the behaviorism, getting the essence of behaviorism a purpose, let's say, purpose to make things happen the way you want them to happen. Out there in a very clear way, in such a way that you can then abstract that idea as such and try to test it in very different situations. So you're not going to step in that world, but you're using it as what if this and what if that, and how it relates to me right now or to my belief.
I still can see the contrast between those two. Can you succinctly tell in imagination in drama education and this education in imagination in contrast will be like that?
Right.
Can you say something like that? Can you formulate the definition?
Well,
because I still couldn't see it.
If in drama in education, imagination is used to build a world in which everyone together has to collaborate and live together in one world, in critical dialogue, imagination is used to build various alternative ideas. Even I need to have imagination to understand your point of view as an alternative, because again, we are not in critical dialogue, there is a deep understanding that I cannot read your mind, and you cannot read my mind. So in order to understand you, I have to use imagination and interrogate you, like you're doing right now with me, to find out how exactly am I going to understand this alternative.
Okay, I can formulate for you right now dialogic pedagogy, but I cannot the other one. So the dialogic pedagogy sounds like imagination is serving to test ideas.
Yes.
Okay. So what is in drama in education? And I want that succinct kind of thing, the contrast.
Imagination is used to create a joint understanding of the world as it is, or inside. Yeah. In education specifically, not in play maybe, but in education that uses play and drama is used to create a joint view of the world.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Okay, so what other contrasts? So we have belief. One is about suspense disbelief, another suspense of belief. Now imagination. One is corresponding to the world. Another one testing ideas. What are the other differences? You mentioned something about agreement, disagreement.
Yes, this is now a difference in the group dynamic, let's say, the legitimacy of agreement and disagreement. So in drama and education, in all its range, from the most closed socialization to the most open socialization, disagreement is not quite legitimate, or it's not legitimate at all. Because that's the spoil sport. It spoils that imaginary world, and the play cannot go on. It's the idea that who is in ahead, that spoil sport is treated in the society not tolerated at all, but the cheater is, because the cheater keeps the illusion of that world and uses it for their own purposes. Well,
so what's the difference between spoil sport and cheater?
Spoil sport is somebody who spoils, comes and breaks the tower you made, or doesn't want to play poker but wants to go and play golf. The cheater wants to play poker with you, but it will cheat you at poker. You will think you are still playing poker.
And so let's bring them to dialogic pedagogy.
In dialogic pedagogy, the role of disagreement is crucial. Because dialogic pedagogy is about testing ideas against alternative ideas. So if you don't have an alternative idea, it means a disagreement with an existing idea.
So what about spoil sport in dialogic pedagogy?
In dialogic pedagogy, spoil sport is the treasure.
Why? Like you say, well, imagine that I will spoil sport will be like that in dialogic pedagogy. You said, I want to discuss drama and education and dialogic pedagogy, and said, no, I want to discuss Buber and Bakhtin.
And I would say,
I want spoil sport, right?
Yes. And I would say, well, so what's the connection that you see between...
I don't see any connection, I just want to do that.
So why are you doing that right now?
Well, this one is my example for you.
Exactly.
But in another way, it will be not example. It's just like, because I'm not interested in that topic, but I'm interested in my topic.
Okay, so in dialogic pedagogy, there is this difference also.
Well, let me give actually a specific example, if you want even push that. In Socratic dialogue, which is can be considered dialogic pedagogy, right? In Meno, you know, there is a tension between Socrates and Meno, because Meno came to Socrates to discuss origin on virtue. Virtue, yes, sorry. Prudence, interesting prudence. Virtue, yes. And so, is it possible to teach virtue, or people born with virtue, and so on and so forth? And for Socrates, he thought that virtue, you cannot discuss origin of the virtue before discussing what the virtue is, right? And at the end of the day, well, if you think about that, Socrates was spoil sport to the Meno, and this fight continued for some time until Socrates gave up on very interesting things that kind of legitimate from my point of view, that Meno came to Socrates to discuss that, not Socrates came to Meno, right? But nevertheless, in this case, dialogic pedagogy, it was clear that the tension has to be resolved, and basically, spoil sport should be symbolically killed. Socrates gave up on being spoil sport.
Right.
And it was not appreciated, by the way, much by Meno at all. Meno appreciated that Socrates gave up. What Meno did not appreciate, that the Socrates constantly interrupted him and wanted to discuss something that Mena, frankly, didn't want to discuss.
Okay, so let's say in drama in education, I'm always reminded of Vivian Paley, who was a preschool teacher and who had a big discussion with in one episode with her children about with whom you can play or can't play, who you can include or exclude. Is it legitimate to exclude people or not exclude people? So in drama in education, there is a very, very strong belief that exclusion is not allowed, that you have to include everyone. And so if you cannot include them, or if they are the spoil sport, they spoil for everyone. So in that sense, the teacher or the collective of children, if you say, has to either suck somebody in, or if they can't suck, they have to really cut them off. They have to send them to the principal, go to another room.
Is it not the same in dialogic pedagogy?
No.
At the end of the day, Socrates surrendered.
Right. It's not the same because it's illegitimate to. The disagreement is illegitimate completely. So because then everything falls apart.
So okay. So some sport will be okay in dialogic pedagogy, but some not.
No, I think that all of them would be okay, because I think dialogic pedagogy has a different belief, core belief from drama in education. I think it is based also on a very progressivist idea that you can teach everybody.
No. Again, let's not go to the progressive education, because here it's something like, okay, this is example.
Right.
In dialogic pedagogy, when the person brings completely different topic or can see this is useless to discuss before discussing that. Right. And there is a fight going on between them.
Okay. So in drama in education, the teacher has the last word. In dialogic pedagogy, if a student is not interested in what you want to teach them, you as a teacher have to go after the student or
and this
is support the student's interest.
No, I understand that. In this case, this was basis on which Socrates surrendered. I understand that. What if there are two students? What it would be not Socrates who had this sport, but let's say Mena and his friend Anitas, and Anitas will say, no, it's useless to discuss origin of virtue before discussing what virtue is. And Mena said, no, I came with you guys to discuss exactly that. What would, let's say, imaginary Socrates would do?
Well, there could be different solutions. It could be solutions, let's discuss one and the other, or for them it's...
But that's the same
or Socrates would say, I cannot teach you together, I have to be with you separate.
But is it not the same in drama education? Okay, you want to play castles and I want to play World War II. Okay, let's play one and then another, or let's separate and you will play one game. How it's different from drama and education? In drama education, it will be probably the same kind of wise solutions.
Yes, but one of the illegitimate things is non-participation, because they see that education stops them. Non-participation, and not only stops for the spoil sport person who does not go along, but stops for everyone, because there is somebody who distracts the whole illusion, destroys the whole illusion.
Okay, so we're basically returning back, suspending this belief. So it's not what I'm learning from you right now, when maybe we disagree with each other. It's probably you're not talking about any sport, but particularly the ones who destroying illusion. It's not who's saying let's play golf. That's a different type of sport that probably have similar effect in both this and that. But there are some who disrupting the kind of shared make-believe situation, and that's the difference.
That's the difference.
Okay. So what are the differences in there? So, and let me talk about this, the relationship to belief, the place of the imaginary, the agreement and disagreement. That's important. Anything else?
I cannot. think, at this moment.
Okay, we're coming to the wonderful end, but
Do
before
you
that,
have do you think that there is any more differences from what you? From
well,
your
again, I don't know. That's for me. That's not. I'm not very familiar with drama and education. That's why. But I have a question, nevertheless.
Okay.
Different questions, like why people fascinate with drama education. Why people fascinated about dialogic pedagogy. Like, can you kind of explain or share like inspiration? Why are people so excited about one thing versus another?
Well, first of all, both of them, we could say shared. There is something shared between them. One fascination is that it uses imagination for creating either joint worlds or what if situations, and in that way, it enables some kind of transcendence from the given through some imagination. So, and that's also very engaging for the students. So that's another thing, that it's the full person gets engaged either in playing with in drama in education or in critical dialogue. There is a passion behind that for both of them. There is authorship in both of them, because there is a lot of improvisational authorship in drama in education, and definitely a lot of improvisation and critical authorship in dialogic education. There is a agency through that authorship that grows for everyone. So definitely it's not alienated kind of work. But critical...
so why people excited about specifically about drama and education?
I think there is a lot of aesthetic excitement, because beautiful new things emerge. People show what they can author, that they could. There's a lot of occasions for people to discover many things about themselves, like through play. In drama and education, they didn't know before. Sometimes that's the only occasion for students and for the teacher to discover possibilities and test boundaries in that way, in that imaginary world. And in critical dialogue, on top of aesthetics, is the possibility to really test your deep-seated ideas, not about just imaginary world, but about who you are and what the world is, and who is this other person, and how it all relates to you in a much deeper, to me at least, way, which comes with the critical reflection. In drama and education, it could be very deep also, but one thing that's lacking there is critical reflection. It may happen, but it's not something that's in plan. It can serendipitously happen for people. It's not part of the overt, except sometimes in some of these drama and education teachers, they have debriefing situations after the whole thing is over, to sit and talk about what happened. And that's possible. Then at that point it becomes critical dialogue.
And you actually foresee my other question, but before that, I actually, you asked me whether or not I noticed some other contrast. Listening to you, I will think about two more contrasts, although they're related. I think drama and education, and I think again about excitement, why people can be excited about that. And I hear one possibility for them being excited because they prioritize creative authorship, promoting creative authorship in the students. And which can be very exciting, especially when socialization is open. Not most one of the cases that you described, when socialization is actually sounds like much closed, but when it's open. And specifically, I'm thinking about our friend and colleague Charles Beasley, and I would like to know what he thinks about that. I think that he often prioritizes that creative authorship. In dialogic pedagogy, especially particular dialogic pedagogy that maybe Socrates had in mind, or some versions of Bakhtinian people have in mind, which is, as you mentioned, critical dialogue, the focus on critical authorship, not creative authorship, but critical. By the way, both critical authorship and creative authorship they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, in the sense that in creative authorship, they also engage in some critical authorship as well, but it's subordinated to creativity, and vice versa. Of course, critical authorship requires creativity, but it's subordinated to that. Which leads me to another contrast in drama in education. Again, I don't know if it's true, and my colleagues agree or disagree, or you disagree with that or not, but it's focused on construction, while critical dialogue or dialogic pedagogy that focus on critical dialogue focus on deconstruction.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah. Actually, that was my last idea in the article, that critical authorship is constructive, and it's very, of course,
you say
constructive.
Also constructive.
No, critical authorship is constructive. That's its purpose, to construct something.
You're talking critical or creative?
Creative. Did I say critical?
Yeah, you're constantly saying critical. That's why.
Creative. Okay, sorry. Creative authorship is about construction. And obviously, for our all lives in everyday world and in imagination, construction is very important. There is nothing that we can point to that's not made by construction of creative people in many ways, even just the most mundane classes or scouts or whatever. But critical deconstruction is the main primary focus of critical dialogue, where we stop for a moment to believe that the world is what it is and start to take it apart and find out, like, maybe it's something different than we thought. Maybe what we see or believe is just a surface illusion. Maybe there is something else behind that, or maybe it could be completely differently understood, like when there are big paradigmatic shifts. And that kind of deconstruction, that kind of critical reflection is also very necessary for the world, because everything would be now still Stone Age, in which everything would be beautifully made aesthetically, but not very much moved and completely reorganized and revolutionized. So both of them have their big attraction, but for different reasons.
Which leads to the question, and again, you start addressing that question. From your presentation, it sounds like they're heavily in opposition to each other on many levels. There are some, of course, some similarity between them as well on these two approaches. But the question that I had, and you start addressing that, so I guess I know how you will answer to that, but I would like to hear a bit more about that and specific example, which is, can they be one way or another combined, and how it might look like? And you start already saying it's creating some kind of drama in education with debriefing, with critical debriefing.
Yeah.
Can you give example of that?
Well, even Dorothy Hethcock, that I criticize so much, actually always, when she had a possibility, because not only as guests in different schools where they invited her, but in her own work, she would summon everybody after the game to talk about it, especially younger and older children too.
So there is no difference between these two?
No, I think those are different phases, but I think it's a great difference, because you cannot, if you stop every time when the drama in education starts working, you cannot at that moment stop it with the critical dialogue, because you destroy everything. You're spoiled sport for drama in education. But you have to give it time.
But that's understandable. It could be the same thing. You can think in dialogic pedagogy. There could be some experiments that you run, and for some, like for example, when you brought your Eden magic lamp, you can also destroy that immediately. I say, I don't believe in that, and you will not in this case use that. So I don't understand. Now you confuse me with what you just said. You confuse me.
I think
I stop seeing any difference between them.
No, it's very different, because I think the paradigm, educational paradigm, is very different.
But you just tell me that there will be a critical debriefing added to that, and in this case they become the same.
No.
Why? Okay, why not? Because you just told, you just said
Yes,
that.
first of all, not everyone does the critical debriefing. That's Dorothy Hedford. Many.
But okay, so okay, now you again. I'm very confused now. And so, why are you criticizing her?
Okay, so in drama in education, the values that are supported are values of agreement and collaboration, even in debriefing. Those are the main values of
So,
social
what's the
values.
purpose in this? Okay, now you see, you need to define what's the purpose of the briefing, because before you said it's for critical dialogue. Sounds like
It
no.
could, no, it could. One of the things you feel that there is some kind of a closeness between them.
So what's the purpose of debriefing, Anna? Because you now muddying the water.
Okay, I'm not gonna say
Yeah,
that.
and what's the purpose of debriefing in drama and education?
If it happens, the purpose of debriefing is reflection. I wouldn't say
Reflection of what?
what happened and who we are and how we succeeded. It's a aesthetic debriefing very often. More
So it's not critical necessarily debriefing. It might have aspects,
yes,
but not
I
in
think
general.
it's aesthetic and from the point of view of a success of the community. Like we are a community of people who
what we
create
can, what we can learn from that. I've learned from that how to do this ink, how Marx did use, and this is will be
Or I learned from that something about Eugene's life that he built in there from his childhood I didn't know before. So.
Okay, I understand that. Now let's switch contrast, because now we complicate, I think, by debriefing. How would be in dialogic pedagogy, let's say they have this situation of the magic mark or some others, how the kind of debriefing will be different?
Right. I don't think that debriefing is a concept that would go with the critical.
Okay, I disagree with you respectfully. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
There was Rafa game, which is I think belongs to the dialogic pedagogy. Okay. And it doesn't belong to drama and education, although for those of you who don't know, it's a game actually initially designed, I forgot the name of the author, very absolutely mind-blowing things. It's called Rafa. You can Google on that. And the idea is actually designed, the version that Anna and I experience is for the children, although we use that with undergraduate students. It's about simulated cultures game. So randomly a group of students, usually like 20.
Shirts.
Gary Shorts?
Gary Shorts.
Okay. Genius, in my view. Pedagogical genius. So they randomly split a group of students, like probably 30 will be ideal. So a group of 15 and 15, and they are in 2 different rooms. And basically they socialize rather closely, not openly socialized, in 2 different cultures. It's kind of playful cultures. To be short, one of them more like Western. It's about capitalist exchange of the animals and so on and so forth. It's not necessarily capitalism, it's kind of market-based, better to say. And another culture is traditional culture, focusing on the lack or respect of elders. What's happened is after socialization, visitors from one culture going to another culture, and in this case it becomes open socialization because they can behave in the whatever way they want and can be very creative in that sense. And after the game, there is interesting debriefing. And in this debriefing, it's not about only about how they feel, but about become critical analysis why they feel like that, because very quickly the participants of that culture, after playing 20 minutes in that game, start developing a very strong feelings about their own culture and the foreign culture, as well as many interesting other things, critical things, like why, for example, people from this market economy culture become much more upset going to the culture, traditional culture, than other way around.
also the use of the language in the reflection become interesting things, because usually they project their own culture and trying to describe the other culture based on their own culture, and so on and so forth. So the things become very, very deconstructive. Everything becomes deconstructive. It's not about just reflection how you feel, although that's part of that as well. But why you feel like that, and why people, and whether or not the people from other culture feel like that as well or not, and why it's not, or why is it the same, and so on and so forth. So
Okay.
I would say that it was
So,
pretty critical. That was debriefing.
Okay,
And
I disagree with you.
okay.
Okay.
Interesting.
I disagree with you because there in both drama and education and dialogic, critical dialogic, pedagogy, there is something how you start. Like,
But when you say disagree about what?
okay, I disagree with you that that's debriefing. You
Okay.
call it debriefing in Rafa game from the.
And by the way, I think it's called by the Gary Shorts.
Yes,
It's
okay.
even called that.
Because
we can check that.
it's the use of the world of actually, let's say, not really drama in education, but plain education people, and also people who are from political or debriefing, like talking about what happened really to find out something about how other people experience or what they know about what happened
Is
in the
it what
past.
debrief come from summarize?
Yeah, summarize.
Brief.
Also, but
Like,
yeah. But it's not only summarize. Like if you debrief some
I'm-
spy,
I'm-
let's say,
I'm
I always
shooting
think
it,
about the
right.
political. You don't want summary. You want their detailed description of what
Yeah,
they
right,
saw,
right,
what they
right.
experienced, what they think
Reflection,
about
if you said
reflection. Yes. However, in drama and education, what is the main educational situation is play itself. Debriefing or reflection serves to reinforce what you experience and to highlight what you experience. And so reflection is like tacked on onto the experience. You can have drama in education without any debriefing.
Yeah.
Okay, but they still see the situation that's created there is created based on what they call pretext. There is something, let's say, Nancy O'Toole says, that's not her name, it doesn't matter. Situation like this, everybody who comes to play gets a pamphlet. It says, whoever is able to spend the night in this house will be rewarded something. So it's a haunted house, and the whole situation becomes playing haunted house. So pretext, and Dorothy Hitchcock had a pretext for the prisoners of war, like pick up your guns. It's immediately.
What has anything to do with debriefing?
No. I'm talking about how a pretext creates for drama in education one world in which everything can be, and then debriefing is about how well that world was played, what everybody learned from that, and things like that.
How it's different in Rafa Rafa?
In Rafa Rafa, play is provocation for the critical dialogue. That it's played there is a provocation, and that's why I'm talking about pretext and provocation. Provocation is specifically in drama in critical ontological dialogue, a situation in which you create something that's familiar, or people think familiar, suddenly unfamiliar from a different point of view, so that people start to wonder, wow, because in Rafa Rafa game, what they played was pretty kind of like interesting game they never played before, and they played it without knowledge what will happen. The debriefing starts deconstructing that from the point of view, now we have a very unfamiliar situation, but if we start looking at how different culture is experienced when you have your own culture from many different points of view, the game is almost there just to give a provocation for all these various actual testing of your ideas. So it's not debriefing. That's the main.
So it's a provocation to investigate your own culture, deconstructively investigate
your own culture and yourself
your experiences,
and the world, and that you played the game was the provocation for this. In drama in education, what happens in the drama part is the education. And this could be kind of like, it's always nice to have reflection of what you learn. So you can or you don't have to do it, but it's better if you have reflection.
But okay, let me summarize. First of all, to everybody, I checked Google, and Google never lies, and we found what I found, that debriefing means questioning about something. So, and my understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, from what I hear, in drama education and dialogic pedagogy, debriefing is goal is different. So the questioning is about experiences, what we kind of learn from that experiences versus it's kind of the experiences of this imaginary world, which is provocation for us to deconstruct something that beyond of that imaginary things that has happened. Another difference that sounds like in drama in education, debriefing kind of optional. It may happen, might not happen, but in dialogic education, that sounds like that debriefing must happen, otherwise it will be hanging out.
Actually, it's not debriefing, that's the critical dialogue.
That's the critical in itself,
and
yes. Okay.
In drama and education, debriefing could be critical, aesthetic, educational. It will be to discover what we learned about that we didn't even know we learned, kind of like looking back. While in critical dialogue, we are not learning anything by chance. Everything is put on the table as much as possible. So there is no reflection in that sense that something went on and we didn't know what was going on. We start to open everything all the time. So it's completely different focus.
So what I'm learning, my debriefing, so what I'm learning that elements of drama education can be in dialogic pedagogy and elements of critical dialogue can be in drama and education, but they serve very different function
I would say
and role.
that there is a completely different paradigm of education, what education is and what it represents, what's its purpose, how it should proceed, how people should relate to each other, what's legitimate.
So from that point of view, they're not compatible.
They're not, although they constantly interact with each other on the surface, they're as educational paradigms.
Well, again, as elements, but as educational paradigms,
they are not
compatible. Okay, well, on that note, it's interesting to think about that. We will finish, and thanks a lot, Anna, for...
Thank you for a nice question.
for debriefing, or critical dialogue, I don't know what you would call that. Okay, so we're still actually working with Charles Beasley. Maybe we can actually return and ask some questions to remake podcast number 10, which was technological disaster, and so we are negotiating with Chas. Chas all got very excited about this remake idea. So we will see, and Anna will participate in this case. Otherwise, it will be very difficult, or maybe not difficult, to have remembering discussion rather than discussing that, playing in discussion, right?
People from drama in education, Charles, and people who watch it not from that I know from improv in education, like Carrie Loebman or Beth Fairholt, or other people I don't know by name. Please question me and this my proposal of this paradigmatic difference with which you may or may not agree, and bring your new ideas. Send us emails or post on the Facebook about that.
I try to represent a little bit, but of course it's much better if you will do that rather than me, because you're much more knowledgeable, and plus you may be more like believing in that this is your paradigm. Okay, well, see you next time, next week probably, and thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye.